What's up, guys? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this, I want to talk about what's happening with Tesla SPY in the overall market. Just note that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total. And the offer ends very soon at the end of March. Anyways, as far as Tesla's going, we're seeing the share price continuing to look very, very weak. And I believe we're going to be filling this gap very soon, all the way down to 250. Tesla's losing structure right here at this support, so this is a bad sign. And we're also losing the 200 EMA on the daily time frame. So why is this happening? The first thing you have to remember is that Tesla's January sales were very, very lackluster. And that's what really triggered this big sell-off. And then on top of that, their European sales continue to remain very, very weak. According to reports, that's not the best of news. This is a worldwide thing. It's not just Europe. This is happening in China where the sales are down quite a bit. So are the American registrations. They're down quite a bit as well. And then on top of this, you could argue that Elon Musk's politics is leading to a lot of criticism of Tesla. I'm seeing this all over the news as well. You know, he's getting criticized for his involvement in factors like that. I like to be staying out of politics. I don't really like to, get too involved in such. But there's a lot of fear that's being incited by all these pieces of news that's affecting Tesla. And then another factor is going to be the tariff news, especially as we start to see the tariffs on steel and aluminum imports going up to 25% in just a couple of weeks. All this negative news is just continuing to cause Tesla to dump. We're seeing the NHTSA continuing to investigate Tesla, and the list goes on with these negative catalysts. So I'm not scared. I'm not worried. Let them dump this as hard as they want. The reason I say that is because this is going to be another buying opportunity that's coming. And you guys have to be ready because when the buying opportunity comes, it's going to be very, very quick and very, very important. So I'll talk more about this in just a couple of minutes. Let's first talk about Nvidia. What happened with Nvidia's earnings? Well, there was good news and also some not so good news. The good news is that they had their revenue at $39.3 billion above expectations. That's a 78% increase compared to before. They beat on EPS and revenue, which is absolutely fantastic. They also saw their guidance quite strong. We're expecting about $43 billion plus or minus 2% for the first quarter of 2025. That's above Wall Street's expectations of $42 billion. They also successfully ramped up their massive scale production of the Blackwell AI supercomputer, achieving billions of dollars in revenue. Great news for them overall. So this was awesome to see. Good guidance, good growth. But as awesome as it was, the share price still did not move much for Nvidia. I have the chart right here. It's very flat, so not the best of news. So much of this is already priced in. Even though they did well with earnings, they typically beat, they typically have good guidance, but it wasn't really enough to get the share price to run, unfortunately. And Nvidia was one of the last glimmers of hope to really help the market rally. Without that, I still think the market could try to rally a little bit, but if we can't get a big break of 140, and if the market is about to get hit with more news, there's going to be more downside coming. So I want to talk about this just in a little bit more detail. Tomorrow we have Dell announcing earnings and a couple more tickers. Today we just got Nvidia, Snow, and a few more. As far as Nvidia's numbers go, we have them right here. The revenue is up 114%, so at $130 billion. The gross margins were quite good, around that 75% area. Not bad. Operating income is up. The majority of their metrics are actually in the green. If you just look at this year over year, we saw lots of growth when it comes to their margins, lots of growth in revenue. But you have to remember that, and by the way, their gaming sector was actually a little bit weaker. That was only up like 9%. Everything else was a lot stronger. Was this enough to wow investors? Not necessarily. Much of this was already priced in, like I said. The data center revenue is up 93% year over year, so quite good growth so far. And we're looking at year on year and sequential growth driven by demand for their accelerated computing platforms. So that's some good news. And then you also have to keep in mind that their margins were quite good as well. They still maintain good margins. Demand for Blackwell is extraordinary. AI is evolving beyond perception and generative AI into reasoning. That's what we heard Jensen Huang say. But the thing you have to remember is that are they going to be able to keep up with demand? That's one of the things you have to remember when it comes to supply shocks and such, especially when we start to see like new tariffs and factors like that. I also want to add that good automotive revenue that's growing, and then out of their entire revenue, we're starting to see a big sector of it coming from the overall data centers. So that's what's growing very, very strongly. Very good earnings, if anything. But you have to remember that much of this was first off priced in, and this wasn't really enough to get buyers to pump the share price, unfortunately. I was really hoping we would. I was anticipating good numbers, but it wasn't really enough. And then there's external fears, which I still think that are affecting this. I don't think that Nvidia did the greatest of jobs at kind of offsetting some of the consumer effects of higher tariffs and potential factors like that. It's debatable, but I'm going to still make that argument. For tomorrow, it's going to be Thursday, February 27th, 1 hour before the stock market. So we have the GDP numbers coming out, not to mention initial jobless claims. And then we also happen to have some more data, some bill auctions. But tomorrow, look at the GDP numbers. We'll see how that affects us. This is why I'm a little bit concerned about the markets. Donald Trump said some important things today. I read his quotes in my previous video, so I'm not going to read all his quotes, but I just want to say that he is reiterating his tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He's saying he's going to be increasing tariffs on them to about 25% for the majority of goods. He's also saying he wants to do 25% tariffs on a lot of EU goods, especially for cars. That's some very, very big news. He claims the US is being screwed over by other countries, namely China, and he claims that this is going to be the best move. He also implied that pharmaceuticals are going to be included and that he is not backing down. He literally said he's not backing down. He's saying that Canadian and Mexican tariffs are going to be imposed as scheduled. So as soon as he opened his mouth, the market was running. Okay, it was running very, very nicely. Then as soon as he opened his mouth, the market came right back down. So we were running. Then he started speaking. The market came down a little bit. That's the reason why we saw the market sell off a bit. And it's not the best of news. Now, many of his tariff deadlines are going to be like next week, March 4th, and then also on March 12th. I'm going to talk more about this probably in my next videos, but for now, this is a little bit concerning, especially for consumers and businesses. Okay. The effects of these tariffs for the short term are more negative for the economy. Donald Trump argues it's worth it for the long term, but I will make another video and talk about that. But just keep that in mind that this could have a big effect on the markets, especially for next week. The market's extremely fearful. When we're at these extremes, you typically do see some relief. So there might be some relief in the market temporarily, but that relief may just be short-lived because there's a lot of fear right now, and we're starting to see a big shift. So let's talk about the charts. What do I think is going to happen? Starting off with Tesla, then I'll talk about Nvidia. It's very simple, guys. Okay, Tesla is going to dump to 250, in my opinion. Maybe even lower. We have a lot of gaps. The reason why I'm concerned about Tesla is we're already down so much. And then you have to consider that despite the fact that we're dipping like this, Tesla's in a very, very critical position. And with the way it's been dipping, the whole market's going to likely dip. And then with the market dipping, that's also going to drag Tesla lower in addition to the bad news. We're also approaching the end of February, so we might get more February numbers for their sales in Europe and China. We'll see how those end up looking. I also want to mention that many different analysts from Kalshi and different other sources are saying that Tesla is going to be delivering only 359,000 vehicles for the first quarter of this year, a very, very low number, one of the lowest we've seen since like the third quarter of 2022. So there's just so much bad news. So yeah, I think we're going to dump to fill this gap. But before we dump to fill the gap, if Nvidia gets some kind of move to the upside, we might temporarily see an attempt to push for the low 300s, maybe even try to get back to where this trend line is, 300 to 320. That would be a gift if that were to happen, but it's looking less likely. I was looking more probable is that we're just going to start dipping over the next couple of weeks to get all the way down to fill that gap. So keep that in mind, guys. There's a good chance we do dump more. Whether we get some kind of relief rally move and then dump, or if we just dump from here, I do see us potentially dipping a lot lower. So that's the honest assessment of Tesla. Am I afraid? Like I said before, I'm not really scared. This is another buying opportunity, and I remain very, very calm because I'm very confident in the long term of the company. Now, Nvidia is down right now in the after hours, even though they had good earnings. Unfortunately, much of that was priced and wasn't really enough to allow investors. We have a lot of gaps to fill below, but here's the thing about Nvidia. I just want to make it very clear that if we do get some kind of relief move, if we try to get back above 133, we need to break past 136. If we break that, we're looking for an attempt to rally higher. If not, here's what's going to likely happen. If we do see some kind of relief move, that could be followed by a rejection like this. We got to get back above 140. It needs to get back above 140 to bounce for this like inverse head and shoulders like pattern to really pan out. We need that nice bounce above 140. If we can't achieve that, we're going to likely continue to fall. So I need to see this thing kind of push tomorrow, get back above 140 for the inverse head and shoulders to pan out. That's basically the left shoulder, the head, and then the right shoulder. That's what we need for this to pan out. We'll see if we get that rally or not. If we don't get it, if we don't rally that much now, this could be the start of a more corrective phase where we try to push a bit, we reject, we come short of 140, then we eventually start dipping as we get to March and these later months. So keep that in mind, guys. That's what is leading to some fears for me, at least amongst Nvidia. Now for SPY, we had the falling wedge. We were trying to bounce. It is possible we try to see one more attempt to bounce, but let me just tell you one thing. I think we're going to see a dump to the gap fill to about 585 or below that eventually. Eventually, we're going to get that. However, we're not ready yet. I don't know if we're just going to dump that hard yet. What could happen is we try to consolidate or even hold up for a bit before we get that sell off. The sell off could be triggered by Trump's tariffs next week. So maybe we get some kind of rally back up to 598. We consolidate, try to push a little bit. And then as time goes on, we eventually start to dip, especially in March to fill that gap. And we start dumping to like the 580 area. So it's quite a distance away. I do think we're going to see a move like this as the most likely possibility. If we do get some kind of temporary relief thanks to Nvidia, it could still happen before we eventually start dipping to fill that gap. But ultimately, any kind of rally on SPY, I'm going to be looking at that as a shorting opportunity because there is still some downside potential. We've been down many days in a row, and typically we do want to see a little bit of relief first before we dip lower. So we'll see how it goes. Same thing with the QQQ. We look bearish. We have a lot of gaps to fill below. If you actually look at the chart, especially on the daily time frame, there's gaps in, I think, the 490s that are unfilled, like this one, for example, in the 490s. We're going to fill that. There's another one down here. I think we dipped to the 490s, but before that happens, there might be some relief. We could attempt to relief a little bit, try to get back into like the 515, 520 area before, as time goes on, once we get to like March/April, then we start dumping towards the 490s. That's what I'm anticipating for the QQQ, a temporary relief move before we try to continue to fall. We'll see if we get some kind of bounce off this falling wedge or not. But ultimately, guys, I am concerned about this corrective phase now. Like I said before, the tariffs under Trump are going to be one of the triggers. There's a left shoulder, a head, right shoulder coming. This might lead to a little bit of a bounce, especially as we get very close to about 220. So we could try some kind of rebound, but then we're going to likely fail and continue to fall as time goes on. For ES, we're on a bit of a downtrend right now. There may be an attempt to rally just temporarily. We could try to rally back up to about 6,000 or so. If that leads to a rejection, we're going to be making a move right back down. We'll see if we get a bigger move. So 6,000 or so, maybe it tries to go a little higher. But like I said before, this is just another shorting opportunity. If we do get some kind of rally, I think we will eventually come back down. We will eventually lose 5,900 in these lower levels. So just keep that in mind if we do get some kind of temporary move up. There is that falling wedge. We'll see if that helps or not. This might try to rally just a bit before it tries to dump. We are due for a little bit of a bounce. Same thing with NQ. We're going to eventually lose 21,000 to dump to 20,000. Might see some kind of rally to about 21,500 first, consolidate for a bit, and eventually start dipping as we get to March into the 20,500 area. That's very possible. If we lose 21,000, though, I turn bearish, and this will dump a lot more, so keep that in mind. Bitcoin's on a bit of a downtrend. We're going to be watching this support here. We have 85,000 as resistance and 80,000 as our support. Keep that in mind as another potential level. For others out there, we're going to talk about Aapl. Apple's on a bit of a downtrend, getting a rejection off this divergence. I think this is going to dip even more now. So now my view is that this, because of all these tariffs, this might just be a lower high on Aapl. We might not surpass this high very quickly. We might see a temporary move like this before it continues to dip. That could be coming very soon. We might retest 242, if not 245, before it starts to turn back down. So just keep that in mind as a strong possibility. For Netflix, we're trying to rally back up. We have kind of like a nice accumulation right here. We might retest this resistance around 1,000, maybe a little bit higher before this starts to correct a little bit more as we're making lower highs. So just keep that in mind. Look for an attempt to rally back up to the low 1,000s before this starts dipping. MSTR may also try to rally for about this gap fill around 276. Look for a little bit more upside for the 270s before this starts to turn back down. So keep that in mind as well. As far as Celsius goes, we're on a bit of a downtrend. We're looking at the support at 26. Might retest 28 or so before it starts to dip. We have a gap to fill in the 25, so I do anticipate some more downside. For Supermicro, I do anticipate a little bit of downside as well. Looking weak here, we might be on our way back down to about 45 or so. Palantir is looking weak. We have to go to the daily time frame. It's a very important time frame. We are making lower highs and lower lows. We have this gap to fill way down here around 83. We could pump a bit just like this before it starts to dip down to fill that gap. So keep that in mind, guys. There's a good chance we do see that downwards move towards 83.5. For Rivian, we're on a bit of a downtrend right here. As you guys can tell, we're making lower highs and lower lows. We have a gap to fill. I think we do dump towards the 10s soon. We could retest 12 before it starts to dump to the 10s, so just keep that in mind. SoFi, unfortunately, has a head, a left shoulder head and then right shoulder like pattern. We could retest 15 before it starts dipping towards, lower levels such as like this gap fill and then like back down to the 12s. For AMD, we're bearish. We're making lower highs and lower lows. No sign of a bounce. I think we eventually dump towards the 100s. So we could see a temporary move up like this before it starts dipping even lower. So just keep that in mind. ARM is looking weaker, making lower highs. We are due for a temporary move up. So we could be looking for the low 140s, but that's just going to be another lower high before it starts to dip back down below our 200 EMA. For coin, we're on a bit of a downtrend here. We do have a gap to fill above, but this is going to likely start dipping closer to about 200. However, might try to come up. We do have a gap to fill up here, so I would like to see if we could get a temporary rally back up to the 220s before we see this thing eventually turn back down. Amazon's looking weak on the daily. We have a gap down here. We have a lot of gaps to fill in the 190s, actually. There's a gap over here. There's another one down here around 197. So there could be a corrective phase. However, before it happens, we'll see if we get some kind of rally back up to the trend line between 215 and 220 before we end up coming back down towards the low 200s. So please keep that in mind. For Meta, we're range bound between 686 and 657. Whichever way we break determines a bigger move. We might push towards the upper resistance before it starts to turn here. And then we have these imbalances kind of dragging us down. So I do think we might be visiting these lower levels like this. So we could be looking for a move like that. I'd like to see some relief first, a little bit of relief for like the 680s before we turn back down. Microsoft may try to bounce here. There could be a temporary rally coming soon, especially as we have this falling wedge. We could be pushing for like 405 or above before we end up turning back down again. So keep that in mind. I think Google may be retesting 176 to 178. Then we'll see if we turn from there. GameStop may be visiting 25 before it turns, and the AMC may be dipping towards 3.2. But last but not least, we have DJT. This is technically trying to rebound. Keep in mind that we have 25.86 as the main resistance. This might try to rebound for that. We'll see what kind of reaction we get. The VIX has a left shoulder, a head, and then a right shoulder. So keep that in mind. This might dip just a bit. Maybe the market sees some temporary relief. However, there were instances where we saw the VIX kind of do this, and then a couple of, like a week later, it just, spiked back up. So maybe the market tries to relieve itself for just a couple of days, maybe a week. And then with the Trump tariffs coming out again, I think there's going to be a bigger move like this, and we're going to be looking for a much bigger corrective phase once we get to like March/April. That's when the VIX is going to be looking for an uptrend again, the closer we get to like April. So yeah, for now, the VIX could dip. It's possible we dip a little bit more. Maybe we do. That could be because the market tries to rally just a bit, but then that could be followed by a bigger corrective phase. The 10-year is also dipping a little bit, so we'll see how this reacts. The dollar is kind of flat, so we'll give this some time. Unfortunately for Tesla, it's a great company for the long term, but for the short term, I'm anticipating downside. We'll see if we get some kind of temporary relief rally or not to the low 300s, if we could touch those or not. If not, we're going to be expecting this to continue to fall to fill that gap at 250, and we look bearish nonetheless. Unfortunately, guys, Nvidia is not the knight in shining armor. It fails to save this market. And with all the tariff talk, I don't think it's the best for the markets. So we'll see how it goes tomorrow. Maybe we try to relieve ourselves just a little bit before we start to see this corrective phase. With that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Don't worry too much. We have another day for opportunities for tomorrow in the markets, and I'll be back with another update as soon as tomorrow morning. Thank you for listening. I know that there's a lot of hardships and difficulties for Tesla, especially as it looks very bearish. And Nvidia wasn't even able to help this bounce. So that basically tells us that, we have the downside move coming. Whether we get a rally, that's a shorting opportunity just for the short term. And if we don't get that, we could continue to fall. However, I am not phased, like I said before. If Tesla dumps to 275, 250, even the low 200s, I will continue to dollar cost average and buy into this company because I believe there's so much growth coming for the long term, especially when they start unveiling their robotaxi, the unsupervised version in Texas, and this starts to give us more products involving AI. Thank you for listening, guys. Have a good one, and peace out.